Blessed love and peace. It seems we are in this zone of a habit, cooking rice and content. Um, oh, that's charged. However, with these mosquito bites, um, there's an interesting phenomenon that happens when the the earth sets and the natural light is on the other side of the earth. Uh, the scratchies become further pronounced. Um, so, actually, we don't know how much gigs we got on this. We're gonna have to get up that joint. Wow, en 12, okay. So I talk about the citizen effect, and that in being citizens, the guilt for everything the government does. Just see some rather shock and awe military feats of the U.S. military annihilating targets with seeming impunity, the artillery, and otherwise, still recognizing the actual warfare tactics are biological and genetic, and then cyber and digital, even cultivating behavioral control, mind control, mind manipulation via the digital devices, the devil's screen. So, but point here as we get into the actual joint is that for all that shock and awe of bombs and destruction, that influences negotiations, treaties, contracts, salaries, and otherwise. All that benefit and leverage that is gained from that weaponized annihilation. Every U.S. citizen is guilty of that, and all the blood, all the tears, all the torture, and everything else that is committed by the U.S. military, and further, but stay on U.S. military specifically at the moment. That's on every U.S. citizen. So when we say, how many people have you killed this past week? That's legit. And all the semantics and subliminals and whatever else don't cover it. So that's one joint. Now, there's the things that we are directly involved in and directly responsible for, and there are the things that we are indirectly involved and indirectly responsible for. And every citizen is directly responsible for everything the government does, and that's the capo effect. The capo effect is when a boss makes an order, even through buffers, like the Corleones, and then a soldier is the one who actually does the dirt, does the hit, causes the bloodshed or whatever else. The capo who issued the order is also directly responsible, even though hands did not directly do it. The capo is directly responsible because the capo ordered it. The U.S. citizens are, in the democracy, the ones who are in charge. It might be spread over 300 million, and people might try to do that dance of, oh, that was the other political party that was in office. Bullshit. It's on you. Be honest about that, because you can lie and you can finagle and bribe and everything else, much of the earthly, but the judgment exists beyond the earthly calculations and otherwise. So eventually the rain arrives. So that's direct responsibility. Every citizen is directly responsible for every death, every rape its soldiers commit, every torture, every abuse and molestation that the U.S. military commits, that the U.S. Subsidiaries, government agencies, law enforcement, and otherwise commit. Every U.S. citizen is directly responsible, is directly guilty of those acts. It's not a question of tribunals and earthly laws. Save that pimp talk for Disney. So that's direct. I'll give you an example of indirect responsibility. When one goes to the marketplace, as we do, to the store and otherwise, we didn't put the direct order out. Let's go to the store and get a can of processed food or whatever. So, and saying that processed food is provided by a company that's doing dirt and killing people. Actually, this is a little bit, if I get into the details, it's a little bit convoluted, and it kind of undermines the clearness of the definition because the law gets involved in that too. But before we get too complicated, just the simple scenario is that, let's say it's just a matter of like it's slave labor, migrant slave labor, factory slave labor, and additionally. And so it's brought to the market and it's sold at a very, very attractive price. And it's all high quality, at least at the service level. It looks like it. It's filled with all types of chemicals and everything else like that. But anyways, point is that the person who buys that, who purchases that product, is generally not directly responsible for those actions. The person did not tell the company, did not issue orders to the company directly, do those afflictions or whatever else. The person generally does not have an ownership in the companies or otherwise that are making those decisions and that are committing those violations. However, that person who buys the product, the person who goes to the market, even doesn't buy that particular product, but supports the market being there in business as usual, is indirectly responsible because of that. They're getting a benefit. If they're buying the product, they're getting a benefit. They're benefiting from all that stuff, all those atrocities. They're benefiting from that. And so there's indirect responsibility, and that's serious. So there's that. Now, why would it be like a combination? Because what usually happens is that the company that's doing those atrocities actually either one doesn't do the atrocities themselves, and works with a government, its host government, for the government to do those atrocities or to hire something else to do it. But in that scenario where the company works in collusion with a government, then a citizen who goes to that market, who doesn't own anything or doesn't have anything to do with that company directly, but because they're a member of the government, they're a leader, they're an authority within the government, and the government was the one that invaded the village, and yeah, I don't have enough food today. Oh, I do. Line over here. I did not say a prayer, so I shall not consume. Was there no seed in there? It was very small. I can taste the salt though. How about that? Toothbrush. Because a person is an authority within the government, and the government sends its military to clear out a village or to force down policies in another country that are very favorable to the company, and the company provides some monetary compensation or whatever else. In that scenario, the citizen is directly responsible because the services, quote unquote, of the government are utilized to provide that product, even though the citizen might not buy it directly. So anyways, that's an explanation of the convolutedness in that example. All that being said, every citizen is guilty of everything the government does in a democracy, even a representative democracy, even when voting for somebody of a different party, even when not voting at all. That's why people don't vote significantly. Don't want to buy into that and be further guilty than is actually necessary. Or whatever. So that's example of direct and indirect guilt. direct and indirect responsibility. Let's say guilt is a very charged word. Let's say just responsible. Now, an astute, but although disgenuine, criticism can be, when I talk about being guilty. Oh, actually, I guess still have yet to get to this point. I guess. All right. So the question I'm posing to people, and people are trying to bring up some kind of critique about ourselves, what we do, even the bullshit that we do, which is very beneficial to address and call out. But at the same time, anybody who does question us, scrutinize us, challenges us on anything we do, these are some of these anything that we do. We're not perfect. We're not. Even angels isn't the right thing, because angels do nasty work. But we're not 100% infallible. Anything beyond anybody else. But in calling us out, challenging us, even rightfully, there's responsiveness, there's reciprocity, whether we do it or not, whether we like it or not, or otherwise. The people get called out themselves and question themselves, scrutinize themselves about what they do, what they do, what they do, what they do. Even when they're not like us. And again, some of the basics of that are: how many people did you kill this past week? How many people did you kill this past month? How many people are you trafficking at this very moment? How many women are you trafficking at this moment? How many children are you trafficking at this moment? How many men are you trafficking at this moment? How many men have you been trafficking this past month? So there are degrees of guilty responses, or dishonest responses, guilty responses. Like the way guilty, the way beyond reach, the beyond reach way guilty response is to avoid, not to answer, not to say anything back. And there are a few way guilty answers that are within reach, and those are those that are further directly responsive. Don't answer the question. They try to flip the table. So, two things. One way, or there are lots of different ways. Two of them are this. One is, well, what about you? Pointing the finger back. Okay, that's a sign of guilt right there. Deflection, one way or the other. The other one is, well, what do you mean by trafficking? How do you define trafficking? What a guilt right there. So there's that. Now, the guilty response, that is much further within reach and like further in the proximity of redemption, is to answer the plain and simple 15. Wow, okay. Let's talk about that. And not an accusatory criminal prosecution kind of conversation, but you come with some realness and honesty and putting your business up on Front Street. Obviously, like there's you in some dirt, and that's not easy, and it's not easy to get out of. But you at least have the honesty and the courage to like call it, and in that honesty and courage, you are showing some interest, some inclination, some proclivity for letting it go. For like, yo, here it is. What's up, Mr. Saint? What's up, Mr. Righteous? You gonna leave me out of it? Show me how. And these guns and everything around me, show me how. 15, what's up? That's a different conversation at that point now. And that's a very worthy and conversation that's they may smell the rice that I just started cooking. Haha, that might be it too. It's the flying squirrels I'm talking about. That's a conversation that is worthy. but it's a different conversation than what we're talking about right now. So it's a further honest response. It's a guilty response, but it's less guilty and it's further within reach than the ignoring it, pretending it doesn't exist. The responsive accusation, oh, you, or dismissive, oh, craziness, oh, it's a silly question, da da da, or the equivocal response of, well, what do you mean by trafficking, this and the other. Now, the somewhat honest but still guilty response is saying the number. The further guilt, or the further honest answer is each one, every one of them, everyone who's being trafficked. My hand is in it. That's, in an earthly sense, the most honest answer anyone can provide. Now, if somebody's going to be genuinely honest with that, then it's going to be a matter of distinguishing, okay, so how many people are you indirectly trafficking? Because we all, truth be told, have our hands in everyone who's being trafficked. So that's facts, that's honesty, that's truth, that's spirit. But at the same time, we also have to be actual and be like, okay, appreciation for that honesty. How many people are you directly trafficking? How many people have you directly killed by your own hands or through your orders? So some may accuse my articulation of not killing anyone. We don't kill anybody, this and the other. Or when I say that we all kill, we've had our hand in everybody's death and everybody's murder, that being a blanket, a false kind of a false genuineness, perhaps is one way to describe it, of by just taking that spiritual realm and saying everything is everything, that has can be utilized as a tactic for covering the actual guilt. Of like, well, I've killed everybody, and my hand is just as guilty as everybody else. So let's talk about the constructed answers. That's a very high level pimp game response when somebody is actually a kingpin and calling a lot of deaths and everything else like that. Because by calling out that false piety, deterring attention away from the actual atrocities the person is committing and its actual lie. Because we're all guilty in that respect. Everything is everything. In that artificial universality is the term we're looking at. That artificial universality, that by emphasizing the indirect, we cover up the direct atrocities. And it's a manipulative, pimp, a twisted response. So, that being said, I can also say for the record, I don't, in the past week or ever, have to be mindful of that. In beginning the spiritual path, abstain from killing anybody directly, or soliciting anybody to kill, or ordering anybody to be killed, or traffic. That would be difficult, and that's part of what we're talking about at this moment, because that's challenging. I don't intentionally do that. Don't condone it. It's against against what we do. But at the same time, being involved in groups that do it, and otherwise. So anyway, that is a consideration for the moment. There's something else. Oh, okay. Those responses help to provide further clearness when having conversations about politics and cooperation and additional things, particularly amongst people from different backgrounds, different levels of conventional influence and otherwise, and having a voice in the terms that are decided at the collective table. When the invoice, when the bill, when the check is presented about everybody's vices and atrocities sitting at the table, not just looking at the money, not just looking at land or whatever stacks people have piled up. But when looking at also the atrocities that have been committed and sanctioned in the process of accumulating those piles, then the people are much less intimidating and much less convincing when communicating an opinion or otherwise. It's much further egalitarian at the table. So on that note of the world table, we get into the conditions of this moment. And what we observe is that within our specific spiritual community, Asana Ashram, Sangha Yosef, Rastafari, we have a seat at the table, in the world table. It's a very nascent, modest seat amidst very established and sizable seats. And there's a lot of work to do to maintain and to maintain and establish a proper seat, and that's all on us to do ourselves. That's the nature of the seat, sovereignty on the world stage. And one way of describing it is like being made. One of the thoughts that precipitates this is pledging and being accused of skating or whatever else. And a lot of people who make those accusations don't, first of all, in a public sphere, like those who are in that culture, who are in that walk and in that life, aren't having public discourses and making accusations in a public discourse. It's not worth people's time. Those who do kick up dust and make accusations are those who don't have that experience, who haven't been acculturated in that culture, but just use it as a way of like just propaganda or whatever else. So one way of neutralizing that, just like clearing through the bullshit, is just saying, so what pledge process do you go through? What is your experience with the pledge process? Oh, you have no experience. So why are you accusing somebody of being less than or greater than in any type of pledge process? And there are all different types of pledge processes: military, religious, social, fraternity, sorority. That's lightweight compared to the world stage. Sovereignty, battlefield, civilization, politics, professions, job, even athleticism, sports, pledge process, marching band, at the HBCU, pledge process. So it's a way of just belonging and proving one belongs by going through gangster pledge process. So when people who don't have that experience call others who do, it's evidence right there in itself, because those who go through that process, one, there are protocols of challenging somebody, and also it's not even worth people's time to do it here and there just indiscriminately, because when somebody actually does care and it is relevant and it is necessary to answer those questions, it's a matter of going off in the cut and getting in the cut, and just be like, look, we need to know, da 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 da. So, and it's not even that direct either. And it's usually done well. I won't go into all the details. But in this game, this world game, on the world stage, at the world table, we are a sovereign entity at the world table. Nascent and small, modest in size, but a seat at the table. And the thing about it is the plutocracies that exist in the crevices and additionally hidden from the public knowledge and common recognition, who are pulling strings like nobody's business, extremely influential across borders around the world. However, do not have a seat at the table, at the world table, as sovereigns can try to have puppets in some of those seats and otherwise, whether it's a colonial situation, whether it's a corruption situation or otherwise, whether it's a cult kind of extortion situation or otherwise. But they can have very strong puppet strings towards kinfolk and collectives who are sitting at this world table. But the hidden cults and everything do not have a seat at the world table. And because of that, the crevice plutocracies, and I don't mean to sound so derogatory, and I see that being further delving into that trope. But the plutocracies that rule or that orchestrate things from the recesses of life, have an intrinsic jealousy, inferior insecurity, I'll say insecurity, towards all the seats at the table itself, at sovereignty itself. And so even though having a lot of power and influence in what happens at the world table, not having a seat, and then thus having a certain jealousy and envy towards any collective or any person that does have a seat. And because of that jealousy and because of that insecurity, there's a motivation for just sowing the seeds of doubt concerning the table itself, and just making derogatory comments here and there, sometimes very subtle, sometimes very explicit, but hating on the phenomena of sovereignty itself. And anybody who's emerging from the plantation and is looking for solution, the plutocratic recesses are very influential in popular culture and ways of separating children from parents, and so have a further ear in kinfolks, further presence in kinfolks' ear. Starting to fall asleep again. And in having a certain presence within kinfolk's ear from a very young age, through popular culture, through fatigues of parents always keeping an eye out on children, and babysitters, teachers, and others filling in a role of subordinate parents, in those scenarios that are manipulated significantly from the plutocratic recesses, there is the discouragement of people having an increasing devaluation for the world table itself, and instead to focus on individualism, narcissism, in other words, rather than recognizing and participating and organizing within a sense of shared cohesion of a common goal as community. So recognizing that as sovereigns at the table, it's beneficial to observe what's happening at the table and around the table with such influences that aren't towards any particular group, whether ourselves or others, but it's towards the table itself. And that the table, once one is provided a seat, the table requires protection from such aggressions and insecurities. And the way of preserving sovereignty itself is through discipline, mindfulness, honesty. Deen, the mitzvot, and otherwise. There's a purpose for liberation greater than oneself. So when we are encountering the competitions and the tactics of the plutocracies from the recesses, the mudslinging and just like the provocations, to recognize that much of the motivation for these provocations is for the separation of kinfolk from sovereignty. Yes, there's the eventual necessity of addressing this and the other, but to also do it in a way that is further intentional and disciplined within our sovereignty. There's something else, but again, once we start falling asleep, that lets us know, yo, we need some sleep, need some energy. Cooking rice right now because I haven't eaten today, and not sob story, whatever else. That's just facts. So it's not advisable to eat at night, particularly this late. It's 4:30, way late. It's madrugada, the ends of the madrugada. So those are some of the observances and experiences just in since the past few hours. Some of this is from before, but just being articulated now. One thing that is shared with us amidst our recent delving within the internet is it seems we are. I'm a piece of shit. I walk with God. I'm no better, no worse than anybody else. on this earth or in this life. That being said, what we are observing at this moment is an awareness within general society, not across the board, but increasingly, particularly in the region where I exist, where I live, where I reside at the moment. And that recognition, that acknowledgement is that in a general way and in a genuine way, society needs myself and us further than we need society. That's a very strong statement just after saying no better, worse than anybody else. There's a twofold explanation for that, why this is, and how it's being observed amongst conventional authority itself, and resigning itself to actually compromise to our side or with our side. A feat, an endeavor that is unfathomable just a few years ago. But now we are observing an increased acknowledgement of the necessity of acknowledging ourselves, and working and genuinely negotiating and compacting with ourselves. And the twofold truth of why that is, of why society needs myself and us further than I and us need society, is because, for better and for worse, society is holding on to life much further than we are. That's one part. The other part of it is that in holding on to life, American society has yet to find a functional balance with life. Society has yet to learn to live with itself, with all the differences within society, that pluralistic society. And because of this, because society is holding on to life, just period, point blank, or semicolon, comma, just because of the mere fact that society is holding on to life, and that particularly the American society has a lot to learn and develop. To be functional within world life, to cooperate with others proficiently. Because society holds on to life, and because society, American society, is still very much so divisive, and it has yet to learn to live with itself in a peaceful, enduring, sustainable way, because it has yet to have that, society needs us to show methodologies for that cooperation and that well-being and prosperity as peoples from different backgrounds, from different geographies. So that's some of the need of society towards ourselves. Being attached to life, and in being attached to life, being attached to different ways as a part of being alive, as a necessity for being alive, and having yet to find the skill set to do that, and needing guidance from people, including ourselves, and such as ourselves, who have further knowledge and experience about doing that, about being in life for that reason. So now on our side, like for myself personally, particularly, is that we significantly let go of life. That's the nature of the spiritual path, letting go of worldly trappings, competitions, and senses of valuation based on earthly things, money, status, house, education, otherwise. we're less attached to these things. We don't need them as much as society needs them, and needs them to be needed. So we're interdependent. We need each other. But what is increasingly recognizing that we see society, the leadership within society, the leadership within the plutocracies, within the recesses, recognizing that society needs us, and that is factoring into the negotiations. And again, it's not a flex move. We're not saying we're greater than. It's not some claim of conquest or otherwise. It's actually the balancing of what is previously perceived, which is just this notion of victimization and charity and all types of different notions of inferiority and subordination, and tokenism and otherwise. This is next level type of mixed heritage. So, and there's evidence that conventional authorities recognizing that. And thus, there's further propensity and immediacy for negotiation and treaty and cooperation in a genuine and enduring way that involves our residents and further long-term involvements. We are less attached to life. That's the nature of the spiritual path. Again, the prophetic leaders, and additionally, are not entrenched in the keeping up with the Joneses scenarios. And there's an increasing connection with the eternal. And in that connection with the eternal, there is less clutching onto this earthly law. And that affects our relationships. That affects our household experience, which is why in many lineages, people are prohibited from having household relations, because that deters or that detracts from one's spiritual path when the family members within the household are doing something different than that actual discipline. So we are attached to life, but we're not as attached to life as society is. And we have knowledge that society has yet to acknowledge and properly study and practice. We have knowledge of cooperation that society needs. And anyways, that's much of it at the moment. We give all thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim, blessed love and peace of Rastafari.